long are we going to be on?
Probably about 30 minutes. Okay, so we're live now. I'm just going to go paste this URL onto the event page. And let's see. And I think that will let everybody know. All right, so we'll get started now. And then this can be removed after we finish. .com. And I'm here today with a very special guest. I'm so thrilled to see Gena Hamshaw again. Gena is the author of Choosing Raw, the blog at choosingraw.com, and also the new cookbook and guidebook, as I called it, called Choosing Raw as well. And Gena runs the popular blog Choosing Raw, and she is also a nutrition educator. She's a writer. She is a multi-talented, multitasking person. So I know that probably most of my readers, certainly on my blog, are already familiar with Gena. But Gena, for anybody who doesn't know you yet, those few people, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and anything else about your background that you want to share. And welcome to the Hangout.
Yeah, welcome to the Hangout. I'm super excited. Everyone who's here on their lunch break or in the middle of the day, taking a little break from your busy life. So I write a blog called Choosing Raw. It's a vegan blog that features a bunch of raw food recipes. I'm not a strict raw foodist, but I call myself a raw foods enthusiast. And my blog shares a lot of my passion for this way of eating and this lifestyle. I also write about body image and eating disorders and animal rights and food politics, all sorts of stuff. The blog it's ostensibly a recipe blog, but it covers a lot of pretty heavy-hitting topics too. And the new book is essentially just kind of a love letter to the lifestyle that has changed my relationship with my health and my relationship with my body and my relationship with food so profoundly, which is a vegan lifestyle that incorporates a lot of raw food recipes in a very flexible, non-stressed way. And I hope that if you've already got your hands on the book, I hope you're enjoying it. And if you're curious about the book, hopefully this conversation will tell you more of what you want to know about it and maybe inspire you to check it out.
That's great. Thank you. And you know what? I'm going to hold up my copy. So this is.
Oh my gosh! I'm so flattered.
And so look at all my stickies of all the recipes I want to try. And we'll talk about the recipes too, because the food in this, you guys, is just amazing. And we were just chatting before the Hangout about how Gena's style is really recipes that are accessible and easy, and so these are all things that you can make relatively quickly. I mean, there is some prep in some of the raw food.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, but I picked a whole bunch, and they came together really quickly and really great. So we'll talk a little bit about those too. But as I said to Gena, and as I'm going to say in my blog post about the book that will be coming out later today, I see this as more than just a cookbook, and you called it a love letter, which I love. I said it was a bit of a manifesto on how to live healthfully, because I think you encompass so many different things. So just to get started, I know that for you, over the years, your philosophy about raw foods and what's a healthful raw food diet has evolved. So maybe you could share a little bit about your viewpoint, how you approach raw foods, and also if you think there are any differences between what you do and perhaps what I would call mainstream raw foodists think about what's a healthful diet, because I know there are a couple of differences that we talked about.
Yeah, I feel bad because the more I talk about my book, the more I sometimes sound as though I'm like sticking it to the raw food world, which I'm like definitely not trying to do. But I think it's definitely true that there are substantive philosophical differences in the way that I approach eating raw food and the way sort of more mainstream raw foodists approach it. My relationship with raw food has definitely evolved a lot since I first got into raw food, which was quite a while ago now. It was in like 2008 or 2007. So it's been kind of a long journey for me. I had been vegan for a while before I got into raw food, so I went vegan first. But I hadn't been vegan for very long when I discovered raw food recipe, and I think like most people who are first getting into raw foods, I just bought everything hook, line, and sinker. The raw food movement has a very cohesive, coherent philosophy, which is that you know, it is more beneficial to your body to eat live enzymes. And the idea behind that is that when you cook food, you do nature the enzymes in food. And if you leave those enzymes intact and live, your body won't have to produce enzymes in order to digest the food. And then by not producing enzymes, it is spared a great amount of effort that can be directed towards better sleep and better immunity and all sorts of other places. So essentially the idea is that you save energy by consuming raw foods, which you can then, that energy can be distributed to your health overall, right?
Yep.
And it's a very sort of coherent explanation. It makes a lot of intuitive sense in some ways, and I think a lot of the rhetoric of the raw food movement kind of just trickles down from that. And I think that most raw foodists they'll encourage everyone to take it slowly, to transition gradually, to listen to your body. But I do think there's usually sort of an underlying assumption that raw food is better than cooked food, and that the more raw you become, the more ideal it is. It might not be stated exactly that way, but I think that implication is kind of always there. And it's very often, whether overt or implied, it's kind of underlying a lot of raw resources you might find, whether those are blogs or books or newsletters, whatever. So this was raw food as it was introduced to me. I think like most people do, because again, it's a persuasive and really coherent set of ideas about health. It wasn't hard to get swept up in it because I really loved the food. Like, I was a budding chef. I didn't learn how to cook till my mid-20s, and so I was still very much teaching myself how to cook when I found raw food, and I was just so smitten with it. It was so colorful. It was so fresh. It was so creative. It was so beautiful. And just as someone who was really falling in love with cooking, the idea of that kind of challenge, like, create something beautiful and satisfying without using your burner or your stove or any of the sort of little party tricks we're all used to. Right. It seemed like such a cool, innovative challenge. And I thought to myself, like, this is amazing. And I really, just by taste, I very much gravitate towards uncooked food. I've always loved salads and soups and slaws. So it was not hard to love the lifestyle for me. But what I found over time was that a couple of things happened that changed my approach to raw food. One was just further nutrition education. I got my certification in clinical nutrition as I was sort of getting into raw food, and I started reading more about digestion and nutrition. Another was going back and having a pre-med education and learning a lot more about biology and the nuts and bolts of digestion. Hold on, there's a car alarm outside my door, so I'm going to
see if that's coming from you. Okay.
Yep, that's me. Sorry, everyone.
Live, we're live.
Yeah, we're totally live, everyone. This is authentic. So I went back and I did a pre-med degree, which taught me a lot more about what is an enzyme and how does our body digest them and break them down. And I took biochemistry and classes like that. And I think what I also realized is that when I was being honest with myself, I felt better when I ate more cooked food instead of just raw food. And I think for someone like me who historically has a history of disordered eating and a lot of extremism in my diet, the idea of sort of going all the way with raw foods was very appealing because it appealed to my need for something clear and something pure and something, like, as I said, something kind of cohesive philosophically. But I think that it was very hard for me to sort of resist that lure and just acknowledge the fact that I felt better when I ate more cooked food. Not 100% cooked food. I always feel great when I eat a lot of salad and soup and slaws and smoothies. But I thrive much better when I'm also eating beans and grains and, roasted vegetables and all that good stuff. So that's been the journey. The journey was a combination of just sort of the education I've gotten has moved me away from a lot of, I think, the sort of central tenets of raw foodism as I learned them, and sort of it's changed my views of the science itself. And I think, like, on a personal level, experience has really affirmed that I do better when I take this kind of raw fusion approach, which is to say I eat a lot of raw food, but it's incorporated into a vegan diet that includes everything pretty much.
Yeah, which, as you know, I eat very much the same way, but I think, a couple of months ago now, I went to the Hippocrates Health Institute, which is 100% raw and very heavy on juicing, And so for me, coming from a diet where I was maybe eating 50% raw, just as a matter of course, every day, to go to 100% raw, and what I found was sort of the opposite, right? That my digestion improved, I felt better, and so I'm just wondering what's your viewpoint on that? Because Brian Clement, the director, he
Sure.
when he lectures anyway, he's always talking about how everything that he says is based in the scientific research, and of course he still talks about the enzymes in raw foods. So I'm just interested in how you is there a reason why people who are used to eating cooked foods might do better on raw foods, or is it just your metabolism balance and things work out eventually? How do you think that plays a role?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I had the same experience when I got into raw food, which is that I felt like on top of the world. I've never felt better in my life, actually. Like my first few months eating raw food, best I've ever felt. But it was always this kind of high feeling, like this slightly floaty feeling too. Like my energy was actually so much that I felt like I could just bounce off the walls all day when I was like really into raw food. And like there's something both wonderful about it and also I find a little bit not right. I can't really explain why it's not right, but there was just something not very grounded about it for me. And you could put this in a lot of different terms. Like, unfortunately, in terms of in personal history context, like it did sometimes remind me of how I felt when I wasn't eating a lot in the past, which was that I felt really floaty and really energetic, but that wasn't necessarily a good thing. That was like evoking certain feelings I used to have during my eating disorder. I think that like energy, if you were to talk to someone who believes in Ayurveda, they would say that that's all well and good, but it's not grounded. It's too much air. It's not enough earth.
Exactly.
The same kind of thing would emerge if you talk to someone who's a Chinese medicine practitioner. And then I think from just like a biological sort of hard nutrition fact, hard science perspective, you're probably on a raw food diet really enhancing your intake of micronutrients. So vitamins and minerals, which is great. I mean, most Americans don't get enough of those things. Antioxidants, all the micronutrients. Like most Americans are really chronically deprived of those foods. Yeah. And you're also eliminating a lot of the foods that make people feel tired and sluggish, which is, ultra refined carbs, lots of refined sugars, too much coffee, too much booze. I mean, all the stuff that tends to like wear us down and make us tired if we overindulge. You're not eating those when you're eating raw food. So I think it's no surprise that you feel great, especially at the beginning when you're transitioning over. And it's also so much insoluble fiber, your digestion is going to pick up dramatically too. Because, if you have had a fiber-poor diet, like most people coming from mainstream diets, and or you have any history of dysbiosis, like all of those prebiotics in raw roughage and all of the fiber are going to make you feel so much better. But I think that there is also the fact that raw food diets, over time, if you're never including beans and you're never including grains and you want to be a plant-based eater, it is a little hard to meet your protein needs sometimes on a raw food diet. And it can also be hard to meet protein needs without also eating a lot of fat. One of the big challenges of eating a raw diet is that if nuts and seeds are your primary source of protein, you have to eat quite a lot of them to meet your protein needs. And at that point, you are eating like a whole lot of nuts. And as much as I'm all over healthy fats, it can be a little bit imbalanced sometimes. And so I think that
there are sprouts too, right? I mean, sprouts are really high in protein, but
what you hear about sprouts is always they are 80% protein. But if you look at the actual protein facts of like a serving of sunflower sprouts, it's actually not a lot of protein. It's like,
really?
It's just, yeah, it's sort of like, it really depends, but like a serving of sprouts can be as little as like 4 grams of protein, which is just not a lot of protein. It might be for like per weight, it might be a high protein food in that the food compositionally is a ton of protein, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a large serving of protein when you sit down to eat it. So a lot of this language is very misleading. It's the same thing with spirulina. You're always hearing people say spirulina is like 90% protein. Totally true, but you would have to eat so much spirulina to actually get an adequate amount of protein in your diet. You would have to eat, so you would be eating spirulina all day long. So these claims are a little bit misleading. I mean, it's if you're eating sprouted lentils or sprouted chickpeas, sure, that's a more immediate source of protein. But I guess my overarching point is that I think a lot of that floatiness you feel is in some ways indicative of the fact that you're getting a lot of nutrients you probably aren't used to getting. But if you look at the long term, not just a month, not just 2 months, but like overall dietary balance in a very long-term way, a lot of the reason most people who eat strict raw food diets at some point or another end up incorporating either animal proteins and or cooked food again is because at a certain point it kind of catches up with you and you need a little more balance, I think.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that I was thinking as you're talking is raw foods have a much larger percentage of water than cooked foods. So in terms of digestion and feeling good, that's going to help a lot too, because most of us are dehydrated most of the time.
Yeah, most of us are chronically dehydrated. And most of us, it's also worth saying, the great thing about getting into raw food is that most of us just don't eat enough of this stuff, right? Like, you know, most people just eat salad. That's the raw food they eat. I think the value of learning how to teach yourself raw foods is recognizing that most of us probably rely on cooked food at the expense of raw food because we don't know how to make a lot of raw food recipes. And if you get into raw food, you'll learn how to eat raw food in ways that go beyond salads and slaws and smoothies, which is all anyone ever knows. You know, you'll learn how to make a real entree with raw ingredients, which is very cool.
Yeah, and that's a great segue back to your book, because obviously a lot of really good recipes there. So I know this is your first cookbook, so I'm just curious to know how you enjoyed the process, and was there anything about the process you particularly loved, anything that surprised you in terms of writing it?
Yeah, well, the process was, I had a tough cookbook writing experience. It was a difficult birthing experience for me, this one. It was totally my fault. I committed to the book, and I committed to a very tight time frame. Not actually in terms of the big picture. I conceptualized this book quite a few years ago, and I sold the proposal actually well over two years ago now, in the spring. Wow. I sold it the year I was taking organic chemistry and biology and biochem in my pre-med program, which was an insane thing to do. And then I basically knew that I wouldn't actually be able to start writing until after I took the MCAT. So when I sold the proposal, the agreement was that I was not going to deliver the manuscript until quite a ways in the future. Mm-hmm. What ended up happening was that, like most pre-meds, I had to bump my MCAT date back a couple of times because I wasn't ready to take the test. So by the time I actually finished with the test, it was late spring, and my manuscript was due on September 1st. Oh, so I had to write 125 recipes and the entire book essentially in one summer, and that was also the summer I was applying to 34 med schools. So it was a little crazy. It was not the best planning on my part, and I would say that it made recipe development pretty stressful because as you know, being a cookbook author, you really have to work very hard with recipe development. Sometimes recipes don't work out, and then you have to test them many times over. And, when I write my blog, I try to put great food on it all the time and hold myself to high standards. But the truth of the matter is, if you make a recipe and you put it on your blog, you can always go back and edit it later. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's the internet. I think with like a cookbook, you have to be a lot more precise with your measurements, with the portion size. If something's not right off the bat, you can never go back and edit that. So it has to be right at the very start. So I found
there are second printings and things like that, but yeah, you hope that there won't be those kinds of...
Yeah, you don't want to count on that, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to count on a second printing to make the recipe what it should be. So I found the recipe testing process to be incredibly arduous and difficult.
Yeah.
One really cool lesson I learned was that when I started testing recipes for the book, they were all I had just come up with a few ideas in my head, and they were all really cool, but I realized I was making the food, I was like, something doesn't feel right. And what I realized didn't feel right was the fact that they were all much more complicated, and I was trying to be much fancier than the food that I really love to make and eat, which is the food I've been putting on my blog now for 5 years. And I wasn't being very authentic to my own style because it was my first recipe book, and I really wanted to make the recipes book-worthy. But what I did in doing that was I kind of just lost touch with my style of food, which is of course what people who buy this book really want. If they know me through my blog, they want Gena food. So I sort of very quickly in the recipe process realized that I had to stay true to my style.
Wait, we lost you for a second there. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. How long did you lose me for?
Oh, just about 5 seconds. So you were talking about people wanting to. It says my network connection is experiencing difficulties. So yeah, they're going to go to the book because they're familiar with your style and your recipes, and that's what they're probably going to be looking for in the book too, of course.
Totally. And also, like, for people who don't know my style of cooking, I want them to get accessible, easy food because, frankly, a lot of what I wanted to accomplish with this book was to, like, create the kind of resource I wish I had had when I was getting into raw food because the cookbooks I bought were awesome. They were, like, gorgeous, and the recipes were so impressive. But to be honest, a lot of the recipes were way over my head, especially for someone who didn't really know anything about raw food. Like, raw food cookbooks can be really complicated.
Yeah.
And I would like for this to be a book that if you don't know anything about raw food and you buy this book, you feel like you can do it, you know?
Well, that's one of the things I really love about the book because you have the section. So you have, just so to give people a little idea of the book, there are different chapters before we even get to the recipes. You talk about your pantry and all about going vegan, transitioning to a vegan diet, how you can do it, meal plans, setting up your pantry. And then what I also loved about the recipes, because you're talking about more complicated, less complicated. So Gena puts 3 levels of recipes toward the end of the book where you have level 1, level 2, level 3. Maybe you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. That was very intentional on my part. You know, one thing I didn't want to do, like the recipes do, the last section, level 3, includes more raw food recipes, and level 1 is more cooked recipes. And I didn't want to suggest that you want to transition towards level 3 in the sense that the food is better or superior or healthier somehow. But I wanted to divide it up because I wanted to take people from the more familiar to the less familiar. Because I experienced getting into raw food that way. It was like, one by one, I would try something that was a little funky and weird to me. Like one day I tried chia pudding, or the next day I tried making cashew cheese, or I made my own almond milk instead of buying it, or whatever. And I feel like that's kind of how getting into raw is. It's like you gradually enter this wacky new world with things that sound really weird the first time you hear them. Like you're like, zucchini pasta? What's that? But as you familiarize yourself, it actually becomes very second nature, and you realize that a lot of those recipes are actually much easier than a lot of the cooked recipes we all know. It's a whole lot easier to make zucchini pasta than it is to make regular pasta.
Yeah.
So the level 1 recipes in the book they're familiar. It's like you've got enchiladas, and you've got a very basic green smoothie, and you've got a avocado toast, a hummus tartine, like stuff that, you know, no matter who you are, you've probably eaten something like it. Level 3 is much more of the kind of classic raw recipe techniques. It's like making rice out of cauliflower or parsnip, or making pasta with carrot and zucchini noodles, or different kinds of chia puddings. And level 2 is someplace in between. It's like, you know, there are definitely still components that feel very familiar, but you'll be branching out and trying a couple of new things that maybe you haven't experimented with in the kitchen before.
Yeah, perfect. So we were talking before about your med school, pre-med, and I'm just wondering how that experience, if at all, I mean, I know you worked with a gastroenterologist, and I know that you were studying, as you said, all the biochem and whatever. Did that affect how you cook, how you eat, what you think about health, what is healthy food?
Yeah, it did, and not in the ways I expected. One thing that was really validating was that although, you know, as we all know, pre-med and med programs do not address nutrition nearly enough.
Right.
But all the education I got was very supportive of plant-based diet, which was great to hear. You know, I mean, the medical firmament, if you will, has certainly, they might not promote or actively sort of advocate veganism or plant-based diet, but I definitely didn't hear anything anti. And a couple of my professors were really positive about veganism. Again, not necessarily because they would bring it up, but when I would bring it up, I would get a positive, enthusiastic response. So that was really cool. Taking biochem, as much as it was a dreadful, miserable class experience, because it's so hard and so boring, and you have to memorize the Krebs cycle over and over and over again.
I remember that well.
Yeah, that was not fun, but it was fascinating for someone who's interested in nutrition because, like, you know, all of us nutrition walks, we talk about carbohydrates and sugar molecules and enzymes and all this stuff all the livelong day, but this was the first time I actually sat down and had to learn the real intricacies of how these things work. And so for someone who had always had an interest in these things, it was very interesting. That was actually the moment where I learned why enzyme theory, if you will, might be a little bit misleading, you know, because when we eat enzymes in food, they immediately get denatured by our stomach acid and digested along with every other protein that we eat, things like that. So I found it very illuminating, very cool. As far as like my overall approach to food and health, one really fascinating thing that you learn through studying pre-health, and I'm sure you learn this in med school too, is actually you learn how resilient the body is. I think when I started my studies, I still had this idea that our bodies are these very fragile entities, and if we eat even a little bit of the wrong thing, it's just doom, like we're just, and that we have to eat so purely and so cleanly and so carefully all the time. And I have to say, working in a doctor's office and studying health, you get a better sense of the big picture. You realize that the human body is tremendously resilient. And one thing that I picked up on working in a physician's practice is that she has a very conscious base of patients. They're very aware of what they're eating. We see time and time again with our patients that they can be eating everything right, but in fact, some of the patients who are really careful about their food are the ones who seem to have the most difficulty getting better. And a lot of that is stress. And food stress is a huge part of it. And so it was not until I did this that I really realized, like, it is so much better to eat the slice of cake or to have the latte or to have the glass of wine than to stress constantly about your food. The stress, the cortisol, the inflammation that stress will cause you in a long-term way by obsessing over your diet is so much less healthy than the occasional indulgence. And that was a lesson I had never learned before. I was still someone who was very, very rigid about what I thought was healthy and what wasn't. And like seeing how being too concerned with the healthfulness of your food can backfire and prevent the healing process from happening was a very like interesting experience for me.
And I'm way older than you, and I've had just recently come to the exact same conclusion. And I think the more I see, I've been on this Candida diet for a long time and working on this last book, and the more I see people who have health issues, and I think, especially because I studied a holistic nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of taught about what is the perfect food and what isn't, and it's that concept that you've got to eat the right stuff. But I think much more, I've come to believe that stress is more important than almost anything.
All of it. A huge number of our patients are doing SCD diet, FODMAPs, all sorts of dietary nuances. And it's worth saying, by the way, the doctor I work for specializes in inflammatory bowel disease, so they do have real concerns when it comes to diet. They do have to eat, they do have to be careful of certain things.
Sure.
But I can't tell you how often I've heard various gastroenterologists I've come into contact with say, like, if they were to just go off FODMAPs for a week and have some avocado and wine and beans and enjoy it, the sheer enjoyment and stress relief would do so many more wonders for how they feel right now than the like anxiety that has developed around food.
Not that we're advocating, going off and eating sugar-laden chocolate or anything, but it's the stress of it for sure.
Yeah, and there's a balance, right? I think that if you look at like most people in this country, they're way off in the other direction where there's just no consciousness that what you eat impacts your health at all. Yeah. But I think that after you make the realization that food and health are connected, you can take it a little too far and become too obsessed with making all the right choices. And there's definitely there's an area in between that I think is a healthier place to be.
Yeah. And I know we have a few minutes left, but I want to just apologize to the audience. I haven't been able to figure out the technical details of having you type your questions on this page, but we do have the event page, which is how you found this. So if people want to go back to the event page and type a question as a comment, if you have a specific question for Gena, I'll go back and look at it in a couple minutes, and hopefully there'll be some questions there. But in the meantime, as we're wrapping up about the book, maybe I'm just curious to know, do you have any favorite recipes? And if so, what are they? And how, why are they favorites? And what I've put up here in the meantime is showing people some of the photos from the book of some of the gorgeous.
Yay! Wow, though actually everything on that page is one of my favorites, which is
okay.
Really, so I'm going to go around. So in the top right is the heat-free lentil and walnut tacos. And in the bottom left is the zucchini pasta with quinoa meatless balls. The reason I think I like both these recipes so much is I think they both kind of embody my approach to like raw cooked food fusion. Like, as you'll see with both of them, they're dishes that have been inspired by raw food techniques, like using romaine leaves as tacos or making zucchini pasta, but they include a cooked legume or a cooked grain, which is very often how I eat. It's like sort of a base of raw food, but for extra nutrition and satiety and density, I'll include legumes and grains. So those two dishes feel very Gena to me. And the lentil tacos, at least, are also very quick and easy, which is totally my jam. I am not, unlike Ricki, who is like a dessert master and makes incredible sweets, I am not that gifted with dessert. And so I was really, really proud of myself because I feel great about the dessert recipes in the book. And it really encouraged me to get more into making raw desserts, which are so wonderful and fun to make anyway. So I love those fig bars. That's the bottom right there.
Yep.
And that coconut ice cream is like literally 4 ingredients. It's coconut sugar, coconut milk, sea salt, and vanilla. And I was shocked that it could be so good with so few ingredients. And I was also shocked that you didn't have to make like a custard base over the stove before putting it in the ice cream maker. You just literally blend it up and let it churn. And so that was the kind of recipe where I was shocked that it actually worked, but it did, and I was delighted that it did.
It looks fabulous, yeah.
Yeah. So those are also my favorites. I would say that all of there are 12 desserts in the book, and I feel really proud of them all because they definitely took me outside of my comfort zone, but I really enjoyed that process a lot.
And of course, as I was saying to you earlier, I went to the desserts and the sweets first. So I've made the chocolate and I've made some of the sunflower bars, and these aren't a dessert, but they're sweet hemp snacks. And so far, and as I'll show people, I'm just going to take one quick little screenshot of the, that's the key lime pie. Can people see that? Yeah. So that's the key lime pie that I'm going to be blogging about. I'll be posting that blog post this afternoon, hopefully, or at the very latest this evening. So
Fabulous.
That's just one of the last recipes. So before we head out, I'm going to take a quick peek at the event page, and I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. Well, I guess we won't get the Q&As, but people can certainly post them on the event page at any time after. And this video is going to be up on YouTube, so you can post some comments and questions there as well. But so what's up next for you, Gena?
So what's up next for me? Great question. So it's been an interesting year for me. Very humbling. I was planning on going to medical school this fall. That's why I did my post-bac degree for, and it didn't work out, and I didn't get into school. And I chose not to reapply, which kind of surprised me as much as it surprised other people in my life. I had been very dead set on reapplying if I didn't get in, and then for whatever reason, I just kind of knew in my heart that it wasn't the right thing to do. So I'm not 100% sure what lies in my future. I know that I want to continue in the healthcare realm, and that might be furthering my dietetics degree and furthering my dietetics training with an RD or another kind of higher nutrition degree. It could be some sort of counseling training because I do a lot of work. A lot of my work with my nutrition clients now is with people with eating disorder histories, and of course I'm always trying to make myself a better counselor because a lot of the work we end up doing is really much more psychological and emotional in nature than sort of hard science, nutrition, factoids, all that stuff. It could be some sort of combination of those two things. But I think that in the meantime, as I figure it all out, and it hasn't really become clear to me yet, I'm just taking more time to focus on my writing and my blog. You know, I went to pre-med because I had started writing my blog and become so passionate about health and wellness and food. And the sad thing was when I was doing pre-med, my blog often had to take second place to my exams and my studies. So, and then the book came and swooped in, and as you know, it's really hard to keep up with a blog as you're also working on a book. So this fall will be the first time in a long time that I can actually sort of put my heart back into choosing raw in a really wholehearted way, and not feel like I have to sort of squeeze in blog posts in between all the other things. So I think while I figure things out, it'll be nice to take a year to really just love my blog again and love being a blogger and sort of let things become clearer to me gradually rather than trying to decide very precipitously what I need to do next. So that's the answer.
Sounds like a great plan, and I bet your blog readers are thrilled to hear that because they'll look forward to it. So just once again, the book is Choosing Raw by Gena Hamshaw. And Gena, as she just mentioned, she's at her blog, choosingraw.com. And I will be posting my review of the book as well on rickiheller.com later today. So, Gena, thank you so much for joining me. It was so much fun talking to you and seeing you again. It's been
awesome. I feel like we need to do these all the time just so that we can hang out because, you know, it's fun.
Well, I'll be happy to come where you are into New York because you know how I love your city. So.
Visit all the time. Yeah. I have a pull-out, so just show off.
Okay.
Thank you, Ricki, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.